the special edition of Engaging the Dragon. I'm Shireen Bhan and we're coming to you from the China-Europe International Business School in Shanghai. We're going to be talking about Make in India versus Made in China and whether Make in India can take on Made in China or can the two happily coexist. Joining us here to discuss those issues, a power-packed panel, Amit Kalyani, Executive Director of Bharat Forge. Also with us, Dr. Pavan Goenka, the Chairman of CII's China Core Group, as well as the President of Automotive and Farm Equipment Sectors at Mahindra & Mahindra. With us, Professor Rama Vellamuri. He's the Professor of Entrepreneurship at the CIBS. And with us, Ravi Uppal, the Managing Director and Group CEO of Jindal Steel and Power Limited. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Amit Kalyani, let me start by asking you, Make in India versus Made in China. The Prime Minister spoke about lessons to be learned from China, which has already positioned itself as the factory of the world. We cannot compete with China when it comes to economies of scale. Can the two coexist happily?
You know, China, I think, has a 20-year head start on manufacturing. It starts with the overall approach of the country towards supporting manufacturing, towards recognizing the importance of manufacturing and creating an environment that is extremely friendly to manufacturing. You see, every global company is manufacturing in China. We have obviously to learn on the scale side because the scale here is out of proportion to what we're used to. But I think there are also lessons that China can learn from India. I think the way we set up facilities, the way we look at cost, competitiveness and, you know, the risk versus reward. Because we live in a more real world rather than in a world where I think you have a lot more support from the system. And I think that in some ways makes us very competitive and maybe a little more averse to risk taking, but it doesn't make us any less competitive in the long term. I think the future is where we can negate or neutralize some of the disadvantages we have in India, especially on the infrastructure side, whether it's roads, ports, power, whatever it is, and capitalize on our human capital, our knowledge capital, our concepts like frugal engineering, and our ability to generate higher returns on invested capital, and use that to compete effectively long term.
Pavan Goenka, let me ask you, we know the problems facing Make in India, the infrastructure challenges and so on and so forth. But what about Make in India and using the India IPR advantage and combining that with Make in India? Because so far, whatever you've heard from the government really pertains to let's manufacture in India. But what about combining the strengths that we actually have on the human capital side, the IPR side, and then developing for India, developing for the world, not just made in India?
Well, this is my favorite topic. I have said many times that Make in India is not about manufacturing in India, and if we try and do that, we will not be able to compete with the old manufacturing countries like China and many new countries that are emerging, which will become manufacturing powerhouse. We have to leverage IPR, we have to leverage the knowledge base that we have in India, and therefore focus on manufacturing without a focus on science and technology, without a focus on innovation, will take us in a direction where I don't think we can compete. And therefore we should not try and emulate a model of China. We have to develop our own model where the manufacturing, the human skill that we have, the human skill that we need to develop beyond what we have, comes together with the engineering, R&D, technology ability that we have, and then make a wholesome package which is unique and better than what anybody else can offer to us.
But Professor Vellamuri, let me ask you this, because this notion that China is a low-cost manufacturer, that notion China, or that impression China is hoping to correct by spending increasingly large budgets on R&D. In fact, I was having a conversation with someone who suggested that China could perhaps be spending more on R&D than the United States of America, which is in that sense the innovation capital, over the next few years. So China has realized the shortfalls or the pitfalls of the low-cost manufacturing hub model and is now upping the scale more in terms of value, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. So if you look at both the government spending and the private sector spending on science and technology, on research and development, the investments are huge. If you look at the patenting activity of Chinese companies, it is in multiples of what we are doing in India, both patents registered domestically and patents filed for internationally. And China is clearly making a very strong play to become a value-added manufacturing economy.
That transition is going to take time. I do agree with my co-panelists that India has one advantage, which China also had, and that is that we have a huge local market. And if our industrial policy is aligned to the needs of our economy, which is we need to provide employment to hundreds of millions of people in the organized sector, which we have not done until now. I think we have a great opportunity.
But at this point in time, do you believe that China is actually focusing on reviving consumption demand at this, as it transitions itself into a not so much export-oriented economy?
Well, the exports have been growing, in spite of the fact that the base from which China started, it's already huge.
Yeah.
China's exports are about 5 or 6 times that of India and growing, whereas our exports are in fact slowing down. So definitely there is a move to improve consumption through the building of a social security system, especially for healthcare and pensions, so that Chinese families don't feel the need to save so much for the future and spend more. But China will continue to be a major export house, and I think it comes back to what my co-panelists were saying. It is the ecosystem. It is not just the cost center. Compared to 7-8 years ago, the Indian rupee has lost 60% of its value with respect to the Chinese yuan. And it is no longer an excuse for India to say that the Chinese currency is undervalued. That's not the case. Everybody now recognizes that Chinese labor costs are significantly higher than those in India.
There has been a significant inflation as far as wages are concerned.
And if India is not manufacturing more, we have only ourselves to blame. I think we have the most amazing business leaders and entrepreneurs in India. I think if the ecosystem can be improved, the usual aspects, like power supply. You can have the best technology and you can have the most skilled labor force, but if the factories have to be shut down for 5 hours, machines have to be shut down for 5 hours a day, productivity suffers tremendously.
Well, the man sitting next to you may have answers to that question, Mr. Uppal. We know about if there's gas, there's no coal. If there's coal, there's no gas, and so on and so forth. But that apart, you here today signed MOUs in China. What do you think can be done to actually forge a greater collaboration beyond project financing and infrastructure financing?
Basically, India and China have a relationship which has some strange dimensions. We in India do recognize that the Chinese manufacturers have some distinct advantages over us because of the model they have. On the other hand, we have the aspirations to grow, especially with regard to the manufactured goods. So if we open our borders to them, we fear that they will completely cut the goods. And our manufacturing like a baby in the cradle. So if we don't sort of protect our industry, it's going to be dead right in the cradle. So therefore we have this kind of a dilemma, how to go about it. The fact remains that we have an unequal playing field when it comes to India and China. China, for example, you have a state-controlled currency, and secondly, there are package incentives that give, whereas in India we have to fend for ourselves. I think this is at the heart of the problem.
So this talk of an India-China FTA, which has been in the works for almost a decade now, given the fact that there's such a clearly unequal relationship, is an FTA really a good idea?
Well, FTA at the moment is not a good idea. I think we first need to create a level playing field. There must be very open dialogue. As I mentioned several times this morning, that what is the kind of trade deficit that we have between the two countries. And the Prime Minister also mentioned several times we've got to have our own manufacturing. I think that this is something which the Chinese companies have to understand, that we cannot bring ready-made goods in India. We need to sort of manufacture goods in India. Either Chinese company can have their direct presence or they can go in joint venture. We have miles to go when it comes to the manufactured goods. So look at our per capita consumption. They're so low. So even if we come to global average, we have to increase our capacity several folds. And that's where the Chinese company have a big window of an opportunity for them to become a local player.